In The Young and the Restless, power has always come at a cost. But what happens when the price is no longer measured in money, influence, or control, but in love, loyalty, and the fragile bonds that once held a family together? The calm that once surrounded the Newman empire has shattered, leaving behind a battlefield where every decision feels like betrayal and every alliance carries the weight of consequence. At the center of it all stands Nikki, no longer the woman who endured, forgave, and rationalized, but someone transformed by years of silent compromise into a force driven by clarity, anger, and a refusal to be diminished any longer. What makes this moment so dangerous is not just that Nikki is standing against Victor, but that she is doing so with full awareness of who he is, what he has done, and what he is capable of, and yet she chooses to oppose him anyway, knowing that there is no turning back once that line has been crossed. Victor, for his part, remains unshaken on the surface, projecting the same certainty that has defined him for decades. But beneath that certainty lies something far more volatile, a refusal to acknowledge that he has lost control over the one thing he believed would always remain loyal to him. To Victor, the world has always been a game of dominance and survival, where strength is rewarded and weakness is punished, and in that framework, his actions against Jack were not mistakes but necessary moves in a larger strategy. He does not see himself as cruel, only decisive, not as destructive, but as protective. The idea that Nikki would reject that logic, that she would see his actions not as defense but as betrayal, is something he cannot fully accept, because it challenges the very foundation of his identity. If he is wrong, then everything he has built becomes questionable, and that is a truth Victor will fight to avoid at any cost. Nikki, however, has reached a point where justification no longer works. The emotional exhaustion of standing beside Victor, of watching him cross lines and expecting her to follow without question, has hardened into something sharper, something more dangerous. Her decision to align herself with Jack is not impulsive, but calculated, born from the understanding that the only way to truly hurt Victor is not through confrontation, but through displacement. Jack represents everything Victor despises and fears in equal measure. A rival who refuses to submit, a man whose presence alone is enough to disrupt the balance of power Victor has spent years maintaining. By choosing Jack as her ally, Nikki is not just seeking revenge, she is rewriting the rules of the game, shifting the battlefield to a place where Victor no longer holds the advantage. Jack, despite his long history with Victor, does not enter this alliance lightly. His motivation is not rooted in ambition or the desire to reclaim dominance, but in a deeper, more personal sense of injustice. What was done to him cannot be undone. But what troubles him more is the realization that Victor's actions have begun to affect people beyond their rivalry, drawing Nikki and her family into a cycle of damage that shows no sign of stopping. Jack's anger is controlled, measured, but no less intense, and it is this restraint that makes him dangerous. He does not need to prove himself through impulsive acts. Instead, he focuses on strategy, on identifying the precise points where Victor is most vulnerable and applying pressure where it will have the greatest impact. Their plan begins not with a dramatic takeover, but with subtle movements designed to destabilize the current balance of power. Phyllis, now holding control over Newman Enterprises, becomes the immediate obstacle and one that cannot be removed through force alone. Phyllis is unpredictable, fiercely independent, and unwilling to relinquish control without a fight, which means that any attempt to remove her must be carefully orchestrated. Nikki and Jack understand that direct confrontation would only strengthen Phyllis's resolve, so they take a different approach, one that combines legal pressure, technological manipulation, and psychological leverage. The introduction of artificial intelligence into their strategy marks a turning point, not just in the plan itself, but in the moral boundaries they are willing to cross. Access to the system provides them with information, patterns, vulnerabilities that would otherwise remain hidden, allowing them to anticipate Phyllis's moves and counter them before she even realizes what is happening. It is a powerful tool, but one that comes with its own risks, because it blurs the line between strategy and intrusion, between intelligence and exploitation. Nikki is aware of this, aware that in order to defeat Victor, she may have to adopt some of the same tactics she once condemned, and that realization weighs heavily on her, even as she continues forward. Jack, on the other hand, views the situation through a different lens. To him, the use of such tools is not a moral failing, but a necessary adaptation to a game that has already abandoned fairness. If Victor has no limits, then neither can they afford to have any, and this pragmatic approach allows Jack to push forward without hesitation, even as Nikki struggles with the implications of their actions. Their partnership, while effective, is not without tension, because it is built on shared goals rather than shared values. And as the plan progresses, those differences begin to surface in subtle but significant ways. Kane's involvement adds another layer of complexity to the situation. His desire to see Victor face consequences aligns with Nikki and Jack's objectives, but his motivations are less stable, driven by a mix of personal grievances and unresolved conflicts that make him both an asset and a potential liability. Kane operates with a level of unpredictability that contrasts sharply with Jack's calculated approach, and while his contributions can accelerate their progress, they also introduce elements of risk that cannot be fully controlled. Nikki recognizes this, but she also understands that in a battle of this magnitude, alliances are rarely perfect, and sometimes the most dangerous allies are also the most effective. As their plan unfolds, the possibility of Nikki taking control of Newman Enterprises shifts from a distant idea to a tangible outcome, one that carries both symbolic and practical significance. For Nikki, stepping into the role of CEO is not just about power, but about reclaiming agency, about proving that she is more than the woman who stood beside Victor, that she is capable of leading, of making decisions, of defining her own path. But that transition is not without cost, because it requires her to fully embrace the conflict she has initiated, to accept that there is no return to the life she once knew, no easy reconciliation waiting at the end of this path. The ripple effects of this shift are immediate and profound. Adam, Victoria, and Nick find themselves caught in a situation they never anticipated, forced to confront a reality where the family structure they have always relied on is no longer intact. Each of them reacts differently, shaped by their own relationships with Victor and Nikki, their own histories, their own internal conflicts. Victoria, who has long aligned herself with Victor's philosophy, struggles to reconcile her loyalty to her father with the undeniable truth of his actions, creating a tension that threatens to fracture her sense of identity. Adam, ever the outsider, sees opportunity in the chaos, but also recognizes the danger of underestimating Nikki's resolve, while Nick, already burdened by his own struggles, finds himself overwhelmed by the emotional weight of a family at war with itself. Victor's response, when it comes, is as inevitable as it is explosive. He does not accept defeat, does not acknowledge loss, but instead shifts into a mode of retaliation that is both strategic and deeply personal. The possibility of a divorce transforms the conflict into something even more volatile, a legal battle that extends beyond the corporate world into the intimate details of their shared life, turning private grievances into public weapons. Victor leverages every resource at his disposal, every connection, every piece of leverage he has accumulated over the years, determined to reclaim what he believes is rightfully his. Yet, even in his retaliation, there are moments where something else surfaces, something that does not align with the image of the unstoppable titan he has cultivated. The loss of Nikki is not just a strategic setback, but a personal one, and while he may never admit it, it affects him in ways that influence his decisions, creating subtle inconsistencies in his otherwise precise approach. These moments of vulnerability are fleeting, quickly buried beneath layers of control and determination. But they are there, and they matter, because they reveal that even Victor is not immune to the consequences of his own actions. As the conflict escalates, the lines between right and wrong become increasingly blurred, replaced by a more complex landscape where every decision carries both justification and consequence. Nikki's quest for justice begins to mirror the very tactics she once opposed. Jack's strategic brilliance edges closer to moral ambiguity. Phyllis's determination to hold on to power intensifies into something bordering on obsession, and Victor's relentless pursuit of control threatens to destroy the very thing he claims to protect. The question is no longer who is right, but who is willing to go further, who is prepared to sacrifice more, who can endure the consequences of choices that cannot be undone. In the end, This is not just a story about power or revenge, but about transformation, about the ways in which people change when pushed beyond their limits, when forced to confront truths they would rather ignore, when faced with decisions that define not just their future, but their identity. The battle for Newman Enterprises is only the surface, the visible manifestation of deeper conflicts that cannot be resolved through victory alone. Because even if Nikki succeeds, even if Victor is removed, even if the empire changes hands, the question remains whether any of them will emerge from this conflict unchanged, or whether the cost of winning will prove to be greater than any of them were prepared to pay.